Now, I do want to be clear, there is no single one right answer as long as you're separating your concerns. So rather than compare my code to yours, instead look at how my code is organized and draw inspiration from that. Now to start out, I'll show you my index.html file. This is very simple. I have a UL called catList and a div with an ID of cat. It has a cat name, cat count, and cat image inside of it. These things are things that the view is going to hook onto and update whenever it's being told to render. Let's dive into the JavaScript now. First, we'll take a look at the model. Now in this case, the model is simply an object literal, with current cat set to null, and cats being this very large array of objects. Each one of these objects represents a cat. And inside of each of these cats, I've got click count, name, image source, and image attribution. Now let's scroll down and take a look at our octopus. In our octopus, I have the init method, which starts off the entire application. I also have a getCurrentCat and getCat function. The view calls both of those in order to get the current cat or all of the cats so that way it can render properly. We also have a setCurrentCat function. You pass it in an object and it sets the current cat equal to the object that you pass in. And lastly, we have incrementCounter. What that does is it takes our current cat and it increments its click count. Now whenever that happens, it tells the cat view to render. Let's take a quick look at our view before we see the flow of the application. First, we have the cat view. The cat view is an object with an init function and a render function. I've separated these out so that way I can render it whenever I want to, but init only gets called once. For example, I don't want to grab all of these DOM elements from the DOM every single time we render. I may as well just do it once and store them here on the cat view. Similarly, I only want to add the click listener for the cat view once. Now the reason is because as I click between cats, over here in index.html, it just changes this information here. It does not replace the entire div. This div is always here and this image element is always here. So I can add the event listener one time, and then no matter what cat I change to, these elements will always be the same. They'll just have differing content and a source attribute. And lastly, in our cat view init method, we call this .render, which will update the view. What does render do? All it does is it gets our current cat from the octopus, which of course gets it from the model, and then we set the count element and the name and the image to the click count and the name and the image source of our current cat. Remember that these on the left hand are the DOM elements. So that's our cat list view. Render gets called over and over and over again, but init only gets called once. We'll see where that gets called in just a moment. Let's take a look at our cat list view. Our cat list view is actually a bit simpler. Here we have our init method, which only gets called once. We grab the cat list element from the DOM and put it in this variable here. And then we say render ourselves. Let's see what render does. We first get the cats from the octopus, which of course originally we'll get it from the model. Then we empty our UL, which lists all the cats. And then we go over all of the cat objects. And we create an LI, and we do all of the necessary stuff. That being setting the text content equal to the name of the cat, and adding an event listener. Now here's my little closure trick that I had to do in order to make this event listener inside the for loop work. And you'll find that this is a common thing that you'll have to do. If you're adding event listeners inside of a for loop, you actually need to create a larger function, pass in your cat, and then return the function which does the stuff that you want with that cat. So ultimately all of this code says, when you click on the element, tell the octopus to set the current cat and then render the cat view because it's changed. And lastly, add all of our LIs inside of this for loop that we've created to our cat list element, the unordered list of cats. Now let's run through this really fast. Octopus.init, this makes everything happen. When this gets called, the following things happen. We say, hey model, set your current cat property equal to model.cats0. In other words, the first cat in the list. And then we say catListView.init and catView.init. We tell our views to initialize themselves, and then the views handle all the stuff they need to do without the octopus needing to get involved. Now, if you'd like to go over this code, you can find a link to it in the instructor notes. I would definitely suggest you dive in and see if you can figure out exactly how every part of this works. Then compare it to your code. If you want to go back to your code and make any changes, go ahead and do that now. But Don't copy my code. Remember, this is not my project. This is your project. So only use my code as organizational inspiration. Once you're satisfied with your version of Cat Clicker Premium, go ahead and click to continue on.